you hear it all the time, right? Build your personal brand, love yourself more. But what if that whole approach is actually leading us down a pretty dangerous path? Today, we're going to dig into a really powerful alternative to this modern obsession with self-esteem, and it comes from Islamic wisdom that speaks directly to these very modern problems of narcissism and shame. I mean, think about it. We live in this age of the personal brand. Every post, every story, every little update is a kind of performance. So in all of this, how do you build yourself up without accidentally tipping over into a really unhealthy obsession with yourself? That question, right there, gets to the heart of a modern crisis of self-worth. So, the first piece of this puzzle is what a lot of researchers are now calling an epidemic of both ego and shame. It feels like a very modern thing, and it is, but it has some deep psychological roots that have been put on steroids by our digital lives. This culture of the self basically puts us on this crazy seesaw. It creates this constant, nagging demand for validation from others. So when we get the likes, the promotion, the praise, our ego shoots way up. But when that validation dries up, the seesaw slants back down, and we're left with this deep, crushing personal shame. We're just caught in this really toxic cycle. Psychologists today are really zeroing in on this idea of fragile self-esteem. You know, it's not like that secure, stable sense of self-worth that comes from within. Nope. This fragile kind is totally dependent on what the outside world thinks of you. It's basically a house of cards, and just one little criticism can make the whole thing come crashing down, leading to this intense feeling of either rage or just worthlessness. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. Narcissism isn't just one thing. On the one hand, you've got overt narcissism. That's the one we all picture, right? The loud, grandiose personality with super high but very brittle self-esteem. But then there's this other type, covert narcissism. This is someone with low self-esteem who is hypersensitive to shame. At the end of the day, they're just two sides of the same unstable coin, both desperately scrambling for validation to keep from falling apart inside.
Okay, but what if there's a totally different way to look at ourselves? In stark contrast to that fragile model, the Islamic tradition gives us a completely different map of our inner world. So let's take a look at its anatomy.
First up, you have the nafs. And this isn't just ego in the way we usually think of it. This is the very seat of all our primal desires, our appetites, our impulses. It's incredibly powerful, kind of wild, and it's often compared to a powerful, untamed horse. So, if the nafs is the horse, then next we have the aql. This is our intellect, our reason. This is the part of us that lets us tell right from wrong, to see things clearly, and to make conscious choices. The aql is the rider who is meant to steer that powerful horse. Then, at the very center of it all, is the qalb, or the spiritual heart. Now, we're not talking about the organ pumping blood. This is the absolute core of our spiritual and emotional being. It's the vessel for our awareness, for our empathy, and it's our potential connection point to something much, much bigger than ourselves. And finally, there's the Ra. This is described as the divine spirit, or the soul that's breathed into every single person. It's that eternal spark inside of us that connects us directly to our source and gives us this incredible potential for spiritual growth. And this image just puts it all together perfectly. You see, a healthy self isn't about killing the horse, our desires, our passions, but it's about making sure the rider, our intellect, has the reins and is in control. The whole goal is to train and guide our desires with wisdom, not to just get dragged around wherever they want to go. All right, so keeping those two different models in mind, the fragile, ego-based self and the Islamic model, let's see what happens when we look at the modern idea of self-esteem through this traditional lens. So check this out. It's a bit of a shocker. Some studies have found that higher levels of our typical Western-style self-esteem can actually correlate with higher, not lower, levels of delinquency and bad behavior. It kind of makes you think that just pumping up our sense of self isn't always the positive force we assume it is. Let's really break this down side by side with this table. In the modern ego-based view, where does your value come from? Well, your achievements, how you look, your social media clout. How do you react to criticism? You get defensive. It's a threat. And others? They're either competitors or an audience. The end goal is to be the greatest. But now look at the Islamic framework. Your value is built in, a gift from your creator. Criticism becomes a chance to reflect and grow. Others are your brothers and sisters in humanity. And the ultimate goal? It's not to be the greatest, but to be the most conscious of God, the most pious.
the entire foundation for your self-worth is just completely different. And this leads us to the concept of kibr, or arrogance. In Islamic thought, this isn't just, a bad personality trait. It's seen as a disease of the spiritual heart. The Prophet Muhammad defined it with laser-like precision. It's rejecting the truth, no matter who says it, and looking down on other people. It's a sickness of the soul, not just a character flaw.
So, if that's the diagnosis of the problem, what's the prescription? Well, the Islamic tradition lays out a pretty clear path for rebalancing the self and actually finding some real, lasting inner peace.
This path involves a set of inner practices, or spiritual disciplines. You have tauba, repentance, which is all about separating who you are from the mistakes you've made, which is the direct antidote to that toxic shame we talked about. Then there's dhikr, the remembrance of God, which shifts your focus away from yourself. There's sabr, or patience, which is about being strong and steadfast when things get tough. And finally, tawakkul, which is this deep trust in a divine plan, and that frees you from the anxiety of trying to control everything.
And here's where this ancient wisdom becomes incredibly relevant to us right now. Researchers are finding this amazing overlap between these spiritual practices and some of the most cutting-edge models in therapy today, especially something called acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT.
I mean, just look at these parallels. The Islamic idea of sabr, patience, and endurance in the face of suffering lines up perfectly with the core ACT process of acceptance. And the concept of tawakkul, doing your best and then trusting in a higher power for the outcome, that is so similar to the ACT goal of committing to your values and taking action without being attached to the results. They're both trying to get you to the same place, psychological flexibility. So this all leads us to one last really powerful way of thinking about this whole shift in perspective. It's all about how you frame your inner mirror. Think of your spiritual heart, the qalb, as a mirror. In our culture today, we're told to spend all our time polishing that mirror and pointing it right at ourselves. The problem is, when you do that, all it can ever reflect is you, your own flaws, or your own perceived greatness. The Islamic spiritual path suggests something totally different. It says, angle that mirror upward, point it away from yourself and toward the divine. The idea is that the mirror will then start to reflect a light that isn't its own, a light of peace, of purpose, and of a truly secure self-worth. And that really brings us to the core message of this whole explainer. It all boils down to this. The source of your worth isn't found by digging deeper and deeper into yourself, into your own achievements or personality. It's found by recognizing your connection to your source. It's a pretty profound shift in thinking, isn't it? And it leaves us with one final question to really reflect on. In your own life, in your own search for worth, which way is your mirror facing?